From New York, this is Democracy Now!
On what Israel is doing, what Jerusalem is seeing is a continuation of the green light from Washington to continue oppressing and killing Palestinians with impunity.
The Israeli human rights group B'Tselem is accusing Israel of committing war crimes in its assault on Gaza, which has killed at least 213 Palestinians, including 61 children. We'll speak with the head of B'Tselem, plus speak to two Palestinian doctors about Israel's destruction of Gaza's public health system, from bombing its only COVID-19 lab to attacking the homes of doctors and killing them. Plus, as Palestinians across Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank stage a general strike today, we'll speak to a Palestinian activist in the Israeli city of Haifa.
Palestinians in Palestine have been going through unprecedented events. Hundreds of casualties in Gaza, dozens of casualties in the West Bank, and for the very first time, Palestinian houses and apartments are being marked in mixed cities in Israel. These are all unprecedented events, and they are very, very dangerous, and the world needs to hear about them.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The death toll in Gaza has reached 213 as Israel continues to attack the besieged territory by air, land, and sea using U.S.-made warplanes and U.S.-made bombs. Health officials in Gaza say the dead include 61 children and 36 women. Over 1,400 Palestinians have been injured. Another 58,000 are internally displaced and facing shortages of food, medicine, and supplies. On Sunday, 6-year-old Susie Eshkuntana was pulled from the rubble of her Gaza City home after an airstrike killed her mother and all 4 of her siblings. Her father, Riyad, was the only other member of her family to survive.
I ran to check up on the girls. My wife jumped. She hugged the girls and took them out of the room. Then a second airstrike hit the room. I could feel the ceilings were destroyed and I was left under the rubble. The last moment I saw my wife, I saw that she threw herself on the floor and the concrete fell on her head.
An Israeli airstrike Monday damaged the office of Qatar's Red Crescent. Another strike damaged the only COVID-19 testing lab in Gaza. Meanwhile, a clinic run by Doctors Without Borders was hit by an Israeli strike on Sunday. The World Health Organization reports Israeli attacks have damaged at least 18 hospitals and clinics in Gaza. Meanwhile, the White House said President Biden expressed his support for a ceasefire during a phone call Monday with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. But Biden did not directly demand Israel halt its assault. Biden faces pressure from over 24 Democratic senators who are calling for a ceasefire. Meanwhile, Minnesota Democratic Congressmember Ilhan Omar is demanding the Biden administration halt a planned arms sale to Israel, writing, quote, "It would be appalling for the Biden administration to go through with $735 million in precision-guided weaponry to Netanyahu without any strings attached in the wake of escalating violence and attacks on civilians," she said. After headlines, we'll go to Gaza for the latest and spend the rest of the hour on the crisis. In Ethiopia, CNN reports Eritrean troops disguised as Ethiopian soldiers are blocking critical aid from reaching starving populations in the conflict-torn Tigray region. The World Health Organization says almost 5 million people in Tigray are in need of humanitarian aid, with severe and acute malnutrition becoming rampant. Some have already died of hunger, and there are reports of indiscriminate killings and widespread sexual violence by combatants. Over the weekend, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken called on the governments of Ethiopia and Eritrea to stop blocking humanitarian access to the region. In India, at least 21 people are dead and nearly 100 others missing after the most powerful tropical cyclone ever to hit western India made landfall Monday. The storm pummeled Gujarat state with the force of a Category 3 hurricane, compounding India's coronavirus catastrophe. 200,000 people evacuated ahead of the storm, including hundreds of COVID patients, and vaccination sites were forced to close. This came as India reports more than 4,300 COVID-19 deaths Tuesday, making it the deadliest day of the pandemic for any country. In the United States, a weekly average of coronavirus deaths has fallen to its lowest level in 14 months, while hospitalizations and new cases continue to decline. Nearly half of all U.S. residents have received at least one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine, though the pace of inoculations continues to fall, with vaccine supplies outpacing demand. On Monday, President Biden said the U.S. would send at least 20 million vaccine doses to other nations by the end of June.
We'll share these vaccines in the service of ending the pandemic everywhere. And we will not use our vaccines to secure favors from other countries.
20 million doses represents a small fraction of what's needed to vaccinate most of the world's 7.8 billion people. Fewer than 5% of Asia's population, about 1% of Africans have been vaccinated. On Monday, World Health Organization Director General Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus blasted the growing gap between rich and poor nations as vaccine apartheid.
The world is in vaccine apartheid. As you know, high-income countries account for 15% of the world's population, but have 45% of the world's vaccines.
The U.S. Supreme Court agreed Monday to hear a challenge to a Mississippi law banning nearly all abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy, even in cases of rape or incest. It's the first time Trump-appointed Justices Amy Coney Barrett, Brett Kavanaugh, and Neil Gorsuch will preside over a major challenge to the court's landmark 1973 ruling Roe v. Wade. Oral arguments are set for the next term, which starts in October. A ruling's expected next year. Stacey Fox of Planned Parenthood Southeast Advocates said in a statement, quote, "We knew the day would come when that dangerous legislation would not only threaten the health, lives, and freedoms of Mississippians, but the entire country. That day is finally here," she said. In New York, the federal trial against environmental and human rights lawyer Steve Donziger wrapped up Monday, with the defense refusing to call a single witness after dismissing the trial as a charade. Donziger has been in house arrest for over 600 days on allegations of contempt of court after he refused to turn over his computer and cell phone. The case stems from Chevron's unprecedented legal campaign against Donziger over his role in winning an $18 billion settlement on behalf of 30,000 Amazonian indigenous people who suffered the effects of toxic waste from Chevron's oil drilling in the Amazon. In an unusual legal twist, the judge appointed a private law firm with ties to Chevron to prosecute Donziger after federal prosecutors declined to bring charges. Steve Donziger spoke to reporters ahead of the trial's close.
The Chevron witnesses admitted that they had had multiple meetings with the private corporate prosecutors from a Chevron law firm to help them prepare their public prosecution of me in an effort to convict me. This is a process that is structurally designed to favor Chevron and to trample on my due process rights. I cannot get a fair trial.
A verdict is expected in June. To see our full interview with Steve Donziger, visit democracynow.org. In Arizona, Republican leaders in Maricopa County are demanding an end to the GOP-ordered vote recount in the 2020 presidential election results, calling it a mockery and a grift disguised as an audit. Last month, Arizona State Senate Republicans used their subpoena power to take possession of 2.1 million ballots, ballot counting machines, and computer hard drives in Maricopa County, Arizona's most populous region. The recount is being overseen by Cyber Ninjas, a company with no record of working in election security. The company's CEO has espoused conspiracy theories claiming the election was stolen from former President Trump. This is Maricopa County Board of Supervisors Chair Jack Sellers speaking Monday.
This board is done explaining anything to these people who are playing investigator with our constituents' ballots and equipment paid for with real people's tax dollars. People's ballots and money are not make-believe. It's time to be done with this craziness and get on with our county's critical business.
In immigration news, a new report by the American Civil Liberties Union says Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, did close to nothing to prevent COVID-19 outbreaks inside immigrant jails and has even concealed the number of people in its custody hospitalized during the pandemic. A total of over 14,000 people have tested positive for COVID-19 while in ICE custody. Officially, 9 people have died of COVID in ICE jails, but several others died shortly after their release. This comes as over 20,000 immigrants are currently jailed by ICE, a jump from just under 15,000 people at the end of the Trump administration. In a letter signed by more than 30 House Democrats, Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez writes, quote, "We are in a moment of racial reckoning in this country, with communities across the country calling for an end to mass incarceration and racist policing. It's time to end the carceral approach to immigration, which relies on these same flawed systems," she said. Spanish authorities have apprehended about 5,000 refugees who swam from Morocco to the Spanish enclave of Ceuta in North Africa Monday. Among them were about 1,500 children. A Spanish government spokesperson said one person died in the attempt. Meanwhile, the German humanitarian aid group CI says it rescued at least 330 refugees in recent days as they attempted the perilous journey across the Mediterranean to flee poverty and violence in their homelands. And in El Salvador, transgender leaders took to the streets of the capital, San Salvador, Monday to mark the International Day Against Transphobia, Biphobia and Homophobia and to demand the Salvadoran government enact protections for the trans community. This is trans activist Brittany Garcia.
We're marching to demand the Legislative Assembly debate and approve the law on gender identity. It's about a change of name and gender in our identity documents. This identification is the door to accessing our social, economic, political, and cultural rights in the country. Trans people don't exist in El Salvador.
El Salvador and neighboring Guatemala and Honduras are among the most violent countries for trans and all LGBTQ people. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York with Democracy Now! Co-host Juan Gonzalez in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
The death toll in Gaza has reached 213 as Israel continues to attack the besieged area by air, land and sea using U.S.-made warplanes and U.S.-made bombs. Health officials in Gaza say the dead include 61 children, 36 women. Over 1,400 Palestinians have been injured. The United Nations says 58,000 Palestinians have been displaced. Meanwhile, the death toll in Israel stands at 11 from rocket attacks fired from Gaza. Palestinians across Gaza, the West Bank and Israel are staging a general strike today. In the West Bank, Israeli forces have fired tear gas and rubber bullets at protesters in Bethlehem. On Monday, President Biden expressed his support for a ceasefire in Gaza during a phone call with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, but Biden stopped short of directly demanding Israel halt its assault, despite growing pressure from Congress, where over 24 Democratic senators have backed an immediate ceasefire. After Biden's call, Israel continued its attack on Gaza, which has now entered its 9th day. At the United Nations, the United States once again blocked the UN Security Council from backing a ceasefire. Israel is the largest recipient of U.S. military aid, receiving some $3.8 billion a year. In recent weeks, the Biden administration approved the sale of $735 million in precision-guided weapons to Israel. But House Foreign Affairs Committee Chair Gregory Meeks is expected to ask for the sale to be delayed to give lawmakers more time to review it. Israel has relied heavily on U.S.-made weapons during its assault. Israel reportedly used a GBU-31 bomb made by Lockheed Martin to bring down a high-rise building on Saturday, which housed the offices of many media outlets, including the Associated Press and Al Jazeera. Israel's also facing increasing criticism for targeting doctors and health clinics. On Monday, an Israeli strike damaged the only COVID-19 laboratory in Gaza. On Sunday, a massive Israeli airstrike killed Dr. Ayman Abu Aluf, who headed the coronavirus response at Shifa Hospital, Gaza's largest hospital. He and 2 of his teenage children died in an Israeli bombing of the residential area of Gaza City that killed a total of 30 people. Another prominent doctor from Shifa Hospital, Mouin Ahmad Al-Alul, one of the only neurologists in Gaza, was killed in an airstrike on his home. Israel's also bombed many of the roads leading to Shifa Hospital, making it harder for ambulances to bring patients. According to the World Health Organization, Israeli strikes and shelling have damaged at least 18 hospitals and clinics. We're joined now by 2 Palestinian doctors. Joining us from the West Bank city of Ramallah is Dr. Mustafa Barghouti. He's a member of the Palestinian Parliament, head of the Palestinian Medical Relief Society, who has been leading efforts to manage the COVID pandemic in the West Bank and Gaza. And in Gaza, we're joined by Dr. Rasha. To protect her safety, Dr. Rasha has asked we only use her first name and not show her face. Dr. Rasha, let's begin with you. You are at Ground Zero in Gaza. You knew the doctors who were killed. Can you start off by describing the situation on the ground?
Yes. Hello, and thank you for allowing me to speak about how we like these days in Gaza. I would like to express the humanitarian aspects of this work as a physician and as a Palestinian and as a mother at the start. First of all, you can imagine that there is no place safe in Gaza now. If you imagine that you are walking in a city and there is no single part in the city is not targeted, the buildings, the residential buildings, the healthcare facilities, even the street itself, walking people on bike, on motorbike, in their car, mosque, even the beach, the restaurant, the press office. Whatever you can see by your eye while you are walking in any city has been targeted. And this is actually, it's awful, and it makes even paralysis for the movement, for the ambulance, which are going to the hospital. The entry to the Shifa hospital, the main hospital in Gaza, has been all the roads leading to the hospital has been destroyed, and which makes the ambulance need to make a long turn before they reach the hospital with injured patients. Even the electricity station, which has been targeted in 2008, has been targeted again, and now we have no electricity. And this where it has been targeted again, and there is no electricity coming only 2 to 3 hours per day, and we are not anticipating when it's coming. We are using generator, and even there is no fuel enough to supply the generator, and now I have no electricity and no electricity from the generator as well for me personally. The internet tower has been targeted, and we have very, very access to internet. Even this, I think this is to target speaking out and to prevent us from talking and express the situations. The schools, the kindergarten, the factories, the governmental buildings, the banks, the ministry buildings, primary health care facilities, including, as you mentioned, the Doctors Without Borders clinics and office has been targeted, as the MSF spokesperson has said 2 days ago. The residential home, which is the main catastrophe and the main disaster, is that the residential building and so it has been targeted. It has been destroyed over the people who are living inside. And as you mentioned, 2 doctors have been killed, including one of them was my mentor, Dr. Ayman Abu Auf. It was actually a nightmare, and when he was targeted, I remember the night very well. We was following the news, and we know where he is living. He lives close to Al-Shifa hospital. And we used to say that Dr. Ayman is living in the hospital, actually, because whenever you go to the hospital, you find him. If he has a critical case, he just go home and come back to the hospital every time to check his cases. He is a very committed person, and he was my teacher. He was a member of the COVID committee. He was training the board president doctor and the internship and medical school doctors. His loss is really a big loss to the medical staff in Gaza. Really, I cannot imagine that he has been killed, and I think it's nightmare, not more, and I hope I will see him soon. I cannot imagine, actually. I remember that night we was following the news about 3 nights ago, and I sleep late at around 4 a.m., and my husband woke me at 7 or 8, and he told me, you know Dr. Ayman? Yes, Ayman Abu Al-Auf. Then I told him, don't say that, because I was anticipating, but I hope it will not okay. And he said, yes, he has been killed. And his children and his wife, his father and his mother are still under rebels, and they did not manage to get them early in the morning. Me and all my colleagues at WhatsApp group, we are reassuring each other, he's killed, but his children, there was no news about whether they are still alive under the rebels or not, because there is some stories, some people survive. Rarely people survive, and we was hoping that anyone of his family survived. Unfortunately, by the midday, we know that no one from his family survived, and it was a huge loss to humanity and to the medical field in Gaza. Also, another Dr. Ayman Al-Alou, who is a pulmonologist at Al-Shifa Hospital, has been killed in the same strike. It's awful, and as you see, they destroy buildings during night while people are sleeping in their homes. There is no alarm, as they claim. They claim that when we are target residential building, we are sending alarm to the people, but this is not true. This is not true, to be honest, all the time. Most of the time, they are not sending alarms. And as you see in the news, many homes have been destroyed over the people, including a refugee camp beside the beach. It's called Al-Shati. About 5 days ago, also the same, they target a home with around 12 to 15 persons from one family has been killed, with only 5-month-old child survived. It was a nightmare, and I cannot imagine, as a mother, I cannot imagine that how this 5-month baby will survive, what we will tell him in the future, who will take care of him, how he will think about the peace in the future, how he will look at Israel. I don't know how he will grow up, this baby. And I was thinking about if I can give this baby to bring him, to keep him with my children in my home. I spent the whole day.
Dr. Rasha, my condolences to you and your colleagues for the death of Dr. Ayman and the terrible destruction. But I wanted to ask you, there were other medical facilities have been hit as well. Doctors Without Borders said that on Sunday there was an Israeli missile struck a clinic that they were running. Is it your sense that the medical facilities are being targeted by the Israelis?
Yeah, I think it's targeted. It's intentionally targeted, even if they claim that there is something underneath or behind it or surrounding it. It's intentionally targeted. Anesthesia is known that it provides service for pain and for trauma patients, and there was a plan to resume activity for care of the traumatized patients, to provide dressing and wound care for the injured people during this wave. But unfortunately, the biggest clinic for MSF has been targeted, and it's partially damaged. The sterilization unit of the clinic has been damaged, and even the road which going to the clinic has been completely destructed. So I think this is targeted because to increase the overwhelming of the already overwhelmed healthcare system. I'm sure that if this will prolong more, the healthcare system will be overwhelmed, and the capacity is limited, which is already limited due to 15 years siege on Gaza. So I guess this is intended. As I mentioned, the street leading to the hospitals has been targeted for Al-Shifa Hospital, and the main entry for Al-Aqsa Hospital at Deir al-Balah, the middle of Gaza, also has been targeted, and one person was killed in front of the hospital during this target. So it makes no sense to target the streets surrounding the hospital, and it's a humanitarian disaster that if you are not only targeting people but targeting the place where people can be treated, this is another crime that they should be accounted for.
Also, the main clinic responsible for COVID care and the laboratory doing COVID testing were struck. Gaza was already facing a huge problem, as much of the rest of the world, even worse than other parts of the world in terms of the pandemic. How have you been able to manage in this situation?
Actually, before starting of the war, there was almost complete lockdown in Gaza due to increase the pandemic velocity in Gaza. There was around 20 to 30 people die every day from COVID, and the hospital and the healthcare system for COVID care was already overwhelmed. My friends and my friends who are working in COVID units in the ICU and in the ward, ICU care wards, really mentioned that there is no capacity and it's overwhelmed, and Gaza was doing the precautions to control the pandemic. However, there is only one lab in Gaza, central lab, which was doing the COVID test, and it was also like a store where they store the vaccine and they make plans and meeting to plan for the COVID, and this has been targeted. During the war, because of the restriction more, the number of the cases which diagnosed with COVID decreased, but it's due to decreased people movement and seeking health care in the hospitals from the war. But no one knows the actual number of cases with COVID who are not tested, who are afraid from moving from home to do the test. And the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Health, Dr. Yusuf Abdir, said that they are not able to do any COVID tests since yesterday. So it will be double the humanitarian crisis. There will be, in addition to the war, to the victims, the COVID, which could not be diagnosed. Even the vaccination service, which was started in Gaza around 2 to 3 months ago, this would be interrupted. All the COVID, and also with lots of a big member of the COVID committee, like Dr. Ayman, all this will have impact on COVID control committee and COVID control program. And I think that with the upcoming days, we will see a disaster, humanitarian and healthcare disaster, especially also if you add on electricity problem and interruption in the electricity supply to the hospital and the vital place like the ICU setting, which are dependent for ventilation patients. Electricity interruption also has impact on this.
Dr. Rasha, I want to thank you for being with us. Please stay safe. Palestinian internal medicine physician working in Gaza. As we turn now to the West Bank, to another doctor, to Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, physician, member of the Palestinian Parliament, head of the Palestinian Medical Relief Society, who's been leading efforts to manage the pandemic in the West Bank and Gaza. When we last spoke to you, Dr. Barghouti, you had COVID-19. More recently, you were at the Al-Aqsa Mosque when the Israeli forces began their raid. You have said that Palestinian first responders were attacked and beaten as they tried to help the wounded. If you can talk about just what one asked Dr. Rasha, as you oversee both Gaza and West Bank when it comes to COVID, but the attacking of the medical facilities, the killings of the doctors, and the significance of all this. Of course, you're a major political figure as well. Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, says they will not stop the bombing.
Thank you for hosting me. And let me say that our hearts are broken, really, with what we see in Gaza, especially the loss of our colleagues in the hospital. But what is happening really is an act of genocide. It's not just bombardment. It's not just barbaric attack on the civilian population. In reality, Netanyahu has failed drastically. He does not have any military success. And I am telling you, he does not have even military targets. This man and his government is using Palestinian blood and maybe even Israeli blood to stay in power, to evade the 3 cases of corruption that he has to face. And he's doing anything to keep his seat. But what's happening in Gaza is totally unacceptable. And by the way, the 213 people killed there, you have to add to them 25 Palestinians who were also killed in the West Bank during the last week. There are 1,400 injuries, serious injuries in Gaza, but also in addition to that, there are 3,000 injuries in the West Bank. And while we are talking, the army is still shooting people here in Ramallah and in Hebron and in Bethlehem. And some of them are at high risk because they were shot with high-velocity bullets. What happened in Gaza, most important, it's very important to mention that the Israeli army eliminated 14 families completely. I mean, they killed the grandfather, the grandmother, the father, the mother, and all the children. 14 families have been eliminated from the civil record. This is so horrible. And out of these 14 families, one child only stayed alive. A 2-month-old child who lost 9 of his brothers and sisters, as well as his mother and father. What future is going to be for this child? This is what worries me most. The other thing I want to mention is that besides bombardment and destruction of people's homes, and there is no justification whatsoever for destroying 8 high-rise buildings by the Israeli bombs, which are American-made. There is no justification of shooting people's homes and destroying them completely while people are asleep, knowing that Gaza does not have civil defense equipment, knowing that Gaza, since 2006, is under siege for 15 years, and the equipment that the civil defense has goes back to 1996. So not only you bombard people, and people are stuck below the rubble. Imagine the feelings of a person who's hearing the voice of a child or a mother or a man under the rubble, and you cannot reach out to him, and he just suffocates to death. This is the worst that can happen. In other countries, when an earthquake happens, people rush to help. Other countries rush to help. What do we have from other countries today except statements that Israel has the right to defend itself? Defend itself? It is the country that is occupying us. It is the entity that is practicing apartheid against the Palestinian people. You can't even equate between the two sides. And they are not only doing that, they are favoring Israel, the aggressor. Let me also tell you something about what's happening in Gaza. We receive calls all the time from mothers, fathers, and we have our colleagues there who are working on the ground. The worst thing is this psychological stress that is exercised against the children. Bombardment after bombardment the whole night. What you see in Gaza against the Palestinian population, but especially against the Palestinian children, is psychological terror. I call it psychological terror that Netanyahu and his government are practicing against the people. And while we were busy trying to stop the COVID-19 epidemic, which has reached a serious level in Gaza because the ratio of infection is 30%, which means that out of every 100 tests you do, you have 30 cases of COVID-19. That means you have a community spread, a dangerous one. And now we cannot do anything because tests cannot be done. Vaccines are not available. As you know, Israel practiced what I call vaccination apartheid against the Palestinian people. They got themselves vaccines enough for all Israelis, and they gave nothing to Palestinians. And they watched us getting the disease, actually, both in West Bank and Gaza. Now Gaza has shortage of vaccines and cannot provide the vaccines, even the ones that they have, because of blocking of healthcare, because of the bombardment. And now they've lost the only lab that does tests for COVID-19. Our teams in medical relief, which are present everywhere in Gaza, have now to shift from dealing with COVID-19 to providing care to the injured people who cannot stay in hospitals because of the number of injuries, and they have to be treated at home. So our teams have to go now and treat the injured, and our other teams have to go now to the UNRWA schools where there 45,000 people have been displaced from their homes under apartments, they need blankets, they need food, they need water, they need everything. So it's a combination of problems that we have to face because of this terrible, terrible massacre that Israel is conducting, and there is no justification for that. The whole thing started because Israel attacked worshippers, peaceful worshippers who were just praying in the Aqsa Mosque. I was there. I saw them attacking not only the worshippers, they even attacked the first aid providers and beat them. We had 1,000 injuries in Jerusalem because of Israeli army attacks. 6 of them have lost their eyes because of the injuries. And then on top of that, they want to ethnically cleanse the Sheikh Jarrah area. I want to explain to you, there are 500 people, several families in Sheikh Jarrah who have been living there since the 50s. And these families were placed in Sheikh Jarrah because they were ethnically cleansed in 1948 by Israel. These people came from Jaffa, from Ramleh, from Lod, from West Jerusalem, because the Israeli army forced them out. And now the army comes to their homes and wants to evict them one more time and ethnically cleanse them, to replace them with whom? With illegal settlers who are supported by the Israeli government. This is the worst system of apartheid. This is not only military occupation. This is a combination of occupation, settler colonial system, and a system of the worst kind of apartheid that humanity has ever seen. Much worse than the apartheid that prevailed in South Africa at one point of time. And this has to stop. This has to stop. That's why I'm very proud to say today, that today the Palestinian people, all the Palestinian people in 48 areas in what they call Israel, people in the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem, people in the diaspora, all Palestinians for the first time maybe since 1948 are all unified and united in one struggle to end this suffering, one struggle to end occupation, one struggle to get rid of this system of apartheid that has lasted longer than anybody should tolerate. And today what you see is a unified strike, unified demonstrations, unified people who, in my opinion, are going way ahead of their leaders. And their leaders must understand that, and understand that it is time for unity and for a joint strategy of struggle for all Palestinians.
Dr. Barghouti, I wanted to ask you about the role of the United States and also of the other Arab states before this renewed crisis here. Especially the bombing, the destruction of the high-rise where the Associated Press, Al Jazeera, and other news organizations were. Secretary of State Blinken of the United States said yesterday that he has no evidence. He's seen no evidence that this was being used by Hamas, yet the Israeli government continues to say it was. Yet the administration says nothing about the attacks on the press that have resulted here. I'm wondering your sense of where the Biden administration is right now and what it should be doing, and also the deafening silence from the other Arab states at this time.
Well, first of all, let me say that, of course, anything after Trump looks better, because Trump was the worst ever. Not only leader of the United States, the worst ever president anywhere in the world. That man tried to completely liquidate the Palestinian issue. And he abused also many Arab countries to enter into normalization relationship with the apartheid system in Israel. But Biden administration is not doing much better. This commitment to the alliance with Israel and this complete bias to Israel is unacceptable. I do not understand when Mr. Blinken and even Mr. Biden keeps talking about Israel's right to defend itself and does not mention a word about the right of the Palestinians to resist occupation and resist apartheid and to defend themselves as well. This asymmetry, this unacceptable behavior is encouraging Israel. I don't understand why the United States 3 times blocked the possibility of a statement or a resolution by the Security Council to call for ceasefire. Why? Just because Israel wants that. We do not understand how could the administration dare to sign a new agreement about sending more bombs to Israel, more rockets to Israel, while it is committing this war crime against the Palestinian people. Because what's happening in Gaza is nothing but a war crime against humanity. We do not understand why Mr. Biden does not listen to the good people in the Democratic Party, people like Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and Cortez and Bernie Sanders, who are saying enough is enough. And why should the United States continue to protect occupation? Why should it continue to protect a system of apartheid? This is totally unacceptable, and this has to change. It shocked us that Mr. Biden has changed the policy on many issues, has liberated the American administrations from the cages that Trump put them in regarding World Health Organization or the issue of environment or the issue of Mexico or relationship to European countries. But when it came to Palestine, they remained in the cage, and they even praised the normalization agreements, which are misleading, and consider them great effort by Trump's administration. This has to change. The United States has to stop doing that and has to be fair, and they have to accept our right as Palestinians to be free, as Palestinians to be free from occupation and from the system of Israeli apartheid. This, by the way, will be good for everybody in this region and not just for Palestinians. Regarding Arab countries, we are not happy and we are disappointed because up till now, the Arab countries are not doing what they should do. And we are not asking them to fight Israel, but we are asking them at least to stop having normalization with this system of apartheid and occupation, to cut the relationship till Israel stops this oppression of the Palestinian people. We think they should do much more. Of course, we cannot put them all in one basket because some countries are really doing a good job. Some others are not doing enough. But I know one thing, that the peoples of the Arab world are all on the side of the Palestinian people. That's what we have seen in huge demonstrations, hundreds of thousands in Yemen, in Iraq, in Tunisia, in Morocco, and in so many, and most important, in Jordan and Lebanon, where people in Jordan tried in every possible way to reach to us. So I think there is a great discrepancy, a great difference here between the positions of the peoples of these countries and the positions of the governments.
Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, we want to thank you for being with us, physician, member of the Palestinian Parliament, head of the Palestinian Medical Relief Society, speaking to us from Ramallah in the West Bank. Next up, we go to Jerusalem to speak to the head of the human rights group, B'Tselem.
الجلال والجمال والسناء والبهاء في رباك والحياة والنجاة والهناء والرجاء في هواك هل أراك سالما منعما
Latina Vocal by Mohammad Asaf. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. As the Palestinian death toll in Gaza tops 213, the leading Israeli human rights group B'Tselem is accusing Israel of committing war crimes by killing blockaded civilians and destroying infrastructure on a massive scale. On Monday, I got a chance to speak with Haggai Elad in Jerusalem. He's the executive director of the human rights group B'Tselem. Earlier this year, B'Tselem released a landmark report denouncing Israel as a, quote, apartheid regime. I began by asking Haggai to respond to what's taking place now in Israel and the occupied territories.
It's becoming difficult to count the number of military assaults by Israel on the Gaza Strip. So 2008, 2009, and then 2012, and then 2014, and now 2021. We're at the beginning of week 2 of this assault. And I think we should all be reminded that back in 2014, 7 years ago, the military operation lasted some 7 weeks with more than 2,000 fatalities in Gaza, more than 500 of them children. So this is already horrific, but we should also bear in mind that it has gotten much worse in the past, and God forbidden that this will be allowed to continue in the way that it has been allowed to continue in the past.
So where is Israeli society on this, the Israeli Jewish community at this point?
Israeli society first is receiving on domestic media a very different view than what people are experiencing in Gaza and what people are seeing around the world. Israeli media, not because of military censorship, but because of self-censorship, is reporting on Hamas rockets attacking Israeli civilians inside Israel, as indeed they should report on that, but they are barely reporting about the situation in Gaza. So from the perspective, and this also is not new, this has been that one-sided reporting domestically by Israeli media, almost all of it, certainly Israeli TV, also in the previous Israeli assaults on the Gaza Strip. It's a story of Israel under attack, and it's almost never a story about the situation in the Gaza Strip.
Talk about why you're saying Israel is guilty of war crimes right now.
We're saying that because that is the way it is. And I feel almost embarrassed to try and quote the relevant aspects of international law that are meant to protect civilians at times of war. And to talk about distinction and proportionality, the two key principles of international law, they seem to crumble in the face of Israeli strategies of the way the Israeli army is using military force in the Gaza Strip again and again and again and again and again. This is not new. We've seen this before with horrific consequences. We've seen war crimes in previous military assaults on Gaza. And in fact, the impunity of the previous times in which war crimes were committed is what has paved the way for the continuation of more such crimes being committed. So, for instance, if one thinks for a second about attacks on wiping out residential towers, apartment buildings in apartment towers in the Gaza Strip, where in a second dozens of families lose their homes, how can that be a military target? How is that consistent with the principle of distinction? And the Israeli army then explains that there's a Hamas office in that building. Well, if that is the case, and not always, if ever, they provide convincing evidence that that is indeed the case, but let's assume for a second that it is, how is that attack proportional, right? And the numbers add up. Numbers in terms of fatalities, some 200 already, many of them children, numbers in terms of injuries, numbers in terms of destruction, numbers in terms of people that have to flee from one part of the Gaza Strip to another part of the Gaza Strip. We're talking about tens of thousands of people. But what we've seen in previous assaults is that sometimes people that have fled from one part of the Strip to another have been killed by an Israeli strike at the place that they fled to, because nowhere in the Gaza Strip is really safe from Israeli shelling, right? So that is the context of what we're seeing, what has unfolded in the past, and what is continuing to unfold in front of our eyes.
I want to turn to Prime Minister Netanyahu. After speaking to President Biden on Saturday, he vowed Israel would continue to strike Gaza as long as necessary.
We will continue to act with full force. We are hitting the terrorist organization with crushing blows. Whoever lit the fire will receive fire. But unlike Hamas, which deliberately intends to harm civilians while hiding behind civilians, we are doing everything, but everything, to avoid or limit as much as possible harming civilians and to directly strike terrorists instead.
Israel has responded forcefully to these attacks, and we will continue to respond forcefully.
That is the indicted, now on trial for corruption, Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. Haggai Elad, your response.
It's outrageous propaganda, as was used, again, in the past to try and whitewash war crimes against a defenseless civilian population in the blockaded Gaza Strip. And again, it's painful to speak from this experience, but we can already project the way the Israeli army and legal system will in the future, if they have to, try and explain away what has happened. Think about some of the most horrific incidents of the current assault on Gaza, the bombing of a number of homes in Rimal with more than 40 fatalities, and they're still digging in the rubble, and perhaps that horrific number will continue to rise. What the Israeli army eventually is going to say, if they will have to, is that this has been a legal assault because they thought it was a military target and they didn't know some of the aspects of the expected collateral damage. So they would say it followed both distinction and proportionality because they didn't know. And you have to ask yourself, is that acceptable? And I want to answer, that's not acceptable because we've seen that dozens of times before. So on the one hand, they like to talk about surgical strikes based on meticulous intelligence gathering with the utmost effort to protect civilians. And then they would say, regretfully, we didn't know. We didn't know that families were sheltering in the building. We didn't know that the building will collapse. We didn't know that there was a coffee shop next door. We didn't know. Regretfully, as a result of that, while it was legal, an entire family was wiped out, or 3 families were wiped out, and 10 children are dead as a result of that. And it's unacceptable that they would just continue, like on copy-paste format, making these statements that are trying to explain away these war crimes. This is not unprecedented. This should have been anticipated. You use the same military strategy that you've used before, dropping these kind of bombs in the heart of populated neighborhoods, then these are the outcomes. And these outcomes should have been anticipated. And because of that, these excuses by Israel are simply unacceptable.
That's Haggai Elad in Jerusalem, executive director of the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem. To see the full interview, go to democracynow.org. We'll also link to his new piece in the Washington Post headlined, Israel's Chosen a Two-Tiered Society. Violence is the Inevitable Result. And we'll link to his report charging Israel with apartheid. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, general strike in the West Bank and throughout Israel. Stay with us.
وما اروح بشوف حدود سجن الانساني لاطفال العالم حره وانا مالي حريه فوق 50 سنه احنا عايشين ورا سجون البنود اللي سجنيننا ما يتغير مش حاسين ولا نور الا سياج منها احنا شايفين سما لونها ازرق غيمها ابيض بالنص نجمه ذكرى كنت بغير انا صامد عايش متفائل ما تعزل مني الامل بيجي ضار فاصل السوري دور انا مربوط فلسطين كجنين لحبل الطابور بالارض جذور شجر زيتون ضلت
I Don't Have Freedom by Dam. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. As the Israeli bombing of Gaza continues through its 9th day, Palestinians across the occupied West Bank, Gaza, and inside Israel are staging a historic general strike. For more, we go to Haifa in Israel to speak with Rami Yunus, Palestinian journalist and activist who's originally from the city of Lid. If you can talk about the significance of this general strike, Rami, and in talking about you being from Lid, the mob violence, the attacks on Palestinians that's taking place right now.
Well, the strike, Amy, is a historical event for the first time since 1936. That's 12 years before the Nakba, the catastrophe of the Palestinian people, or the founding of the State of Israel. For the first time ever, we are striking in all over Palestine, from the river to the sea. So what's happening right now, I mean, everything started a few weeks ago with a popular uprising. You see youth demonstrating everywhere in Palestine, in Jaffa, in Nazareth, in Haifa, in Lid, and in Jerusalem, and in Gaza, all for Jerusalem, all for Sheikh Jarrah. These demonstrations were countered by a lot of police brutality instantly, and resulting in the clashes, the violent clashes that then turned into basically Palestinians defending themselves every night against attacks by Israeli settlers and the Israeli police. Now, let me go into Lid and describing what's happening in Lid. Lid, my hometown, also Hebrew, in Hebrew they call it Lod, was a Palestinian city that was occupied in 1948, right? Nowadays they call it a mixed city. What happened in that mixed city is that 15 years ago, when they evicted those settlers from Gaza, they moved them into Lid, and these settlers moved into Lid with a very clear and declared goal of Judaizing the city, meaning these Jewish supremacists who were removed from Gaza went into Lid, and mind you, Lid is only 10 minutes from Tel Aviv, 5 minutes from the airport. We're not talking about a city in the West Bank. And started Judaizing the place. They started building their own settlements. They started moving into Palestinian neighborhoods. And we have been seeing a rise in house demolitions for Palestinian people in the past 15 years. The average of houses being demolished a year is somewhere between 10 to 15 houses. Before the settlers moved into Lid, only 2 or 3 houses a year got demolished. The demolitions come because 80% of the people who live there their houses were built without a building permit because the authorities won't issue one, so that they can come later and maybe use it as a political whip to punish the local population. Now, with all of this tension, with all of this background, Palestinians, especially young people under the age of 20, took to the street and started demonstrating. When they were countered by the brutal force by the Israeli police, and then the Israeli right-wingers started attacking them and shooting them on the street, this is when all hell broke loose. Now, Amy, every day I wake up and I reach out for my phone and I pray to God that this is not the morning that I'm going to be seeing a horrifying text message. This is not the morning that I will be receiving the catastrophic news. We are worried. We are very, very worried. And what's even more worrying is that it's not just people, it's not just that these settlers are moving from these settlers are openly attacking Palestinians, is that police is allowing settlers from the West Bank, from places like Yitzhar and Nukdim, people who became professional in burning olive groves. These people are moving into Lid, coming into Lid on a daily basis. They roam free at night in the city streets, breaking curfew, while the Israeli police not only allowing them to break curfew while the Palestinians are locked in their homes, but escorting them, and more often than not, they actually attack Palestinians with settlers, and we have tons of evidence to show for.
And Rami, could you talk about the role of the Israeli media in propagating and legitimizing hateful and violent or Zionist rhetoric?
You know, how the Israeli media and the way they behave these days is a perfect example of how structural violence is maintained and nurtured in Israel. You know, I was in a TV interview last week when it was still demonstrations, before it was basically Palestinians defending themselves against the mobs and the police. I was in an interview on Israeli TV, and then the anchor said that maybe it's time to reload the gun magazines. And we actually, throughout the live broadcast, we counted incitement by him 8 times. He incited 8 times to kill Palestinians on the street. The other day, 2 or 3 days ago, an Israeli journalist, Israel Fry, on Israeli TV, criticized the police, criticized the mayor of Lid, and said that it doesn't make any sense. Why are you allowing settlers to come into Lid from the West Bank? Why are these armed people coming into the city and creating all this unrest? He was immediately silenced by the anchor. So what we're seeing right now, not only incitement by the Israeli police, but they're also trying to silence voices that are coming from Israeli journalism, voices who are criticizing the actions of the Israeli government and the Israeli police. Not only that,
we have 5 seconds, Rami.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just wanted to say that the Israeli police are not telling the whole truth. If you confront them with the evidence, they're basically gonna call you a liar, and they're not gonna.
We're going to do part 2 with you and post online at democracynow.org and play a clip of that interview you did, Rami Yunus. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Stay safe.